Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I'm your host. Okay, so this is going to be kind of a long one. We have both a lot of reviews to get through, including the premiere of Watchmen. So let's just try to get through this as smoothly as possible. First up, we have only really one news item, which is that we have the release of the brand new Bloodshot trailer, which is based on the Valiant comic. The trailer itself is pretty much just a huge spoiler for both the main plot, twists, and beats of the entire story. As a movie, it looks pretty sparse and very pragmatic. In fact, if they keep it lean and tight, it might just be dumb fun and a really good time, just like Venom was. And I mean that sincerely. I've never really been into Bloodshot. I read a couple of arcs of the reboot Valiant, but he's never been something that I felt very, immersed with or engaged with. But if the movie can be a small little capsule of what makes that at least a very entertaining premise, then I'm all for it. Best of luck to them. Heading straight on to what I read this week, first we have Martian Manhunter number 9. I'll just get right out and say it. Another damn good issue, but I can't help but feel like the series is starting to feel a bit repetitive. Just a tad, at least. I think a lot of that stems from how Charn's plan has been unveiled to the reader over the course of the past 3 or so issues, so another issue where it's explained in heavy detail doesn't really add much to the conversation. I know that it wants to have John and Diane discover for themselves, which is great, but going over it step by step just feels like it's going around in circles. The way it's been parsed out and revealed to the reader was already sufficient. It might have skimmed over a few things, but everything else was perfectly implied and implicit, given what we've seen of Charn and his experiments. It's a great issue nonetheless, but with 3 issues more to go, I hope that Orlando and Rosmo have given themselves enough room to really land themselves a solid, gratifying, and satisfying ending. The whole concept of a autopsy and how it's portrayed, though, stellar. Rosmo is seriously just continually set the bar for every other comic artist out there, and I just couldn't be happier. At the very least, that makes the issue a worthwhile and captivating experience, despite any of my cautious misgivings. I'm still just glad to have this book around month after month, and well, it's going to be a pretty thin tightrope it's going to have to travail over these next 3 issues, so good luck to them. I'm still really enjoying the series, and I just hope it all works out for the best. One thumb up, one thumb middle. Next up, we have Dial H for Hero number 8. This is the type of issue that would make Morrison or Johns on his better days proud. Just when I think that I have run out of every possible way to describe how amazing this series has been, another issue comes out and blows me away. This one was just such a fun read. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it's still just a series from 2 creators that seem to want nothing but for this comic to have as much adventurous, exciting, and out there energy as a comic can have. One of the best examples of this, and one of the more underappreciated aspects, has been its use of over-the-top caption box narration. It's not just there for some retro throwback homage flavor, but also helps manipulate the story into wild new shapes and give it this wonderful new structure. It'd be so easy to just have a tricksy backwards-forwards issue. It's been done before, but this overzealous and excitable golly gee narration keeps it immersive and personal even when it's being insane. Humphreys and Quinones are just killing it, and while I still think this second half has been a bit lacking in the same engagement that made the first half so memorable, it's not lacking any of the zest or spirit. So honestly, it's just as good, and I am just so happy that all my expectations and any kind of further hype I have for this series continues to be sailed past. It's just something that is going to stand the test of time, and I feel that deeply. Overall, 2 thumbs up. Moving ahead, we have the Immortal Hulk number 25. Well, I said this would be the make or break issue for me, and it was. I honestly was blown away. Maybe not in the same way that a lot of people were, but it took me to a place I didn't think was truly possible, because this issue finally made the One Below All an actually interesting interpretation and aspect of the Hulk mythos. The previous issue made him properly frightening, but this one made him a fully genuine Hulk villain. The brunt of the issue is mainly centered around this pretty clever framework of it being told from the POV of this completely out of context membrane style alien from after this universe reboots. It's pretty simple stuff, told really well, and their encounter with this version of the Hulk, this new Galactus for their universe, is made creepily effective because they have no frame of reference for whatever is going on. It's just a pinpointedly self-contained miniature sci-fi story, and it hits all the right notes, and that's great. It really is, and I love it for that. But what made the issue for me is finally getting to see the One Below All actually have a heart-to-heart with someone without any real strings attached. It's not really trying to persuade or tempt anyone, nor trying to be imposing. It's just speaking its mind. And what's on its mind is just this intense hatred and desire and need for being the strongest there is and for being alone. And that really got to me, because that's the Hulk. That's the Hulk in a nutshell. That's all the original Hulk wanted. It was practically his first words and his catchphrase for his original run. And it makes the One Below All just that much more interesting, because no wonder he's been after the Hulk. Not simply because of the strength, but because he's the only one it can reach that can make that happen. And it's interesting to see both Bruce and the Hulk have to contend, parallel, and contrast with a being that is the ultimate extreme of their innate desires and misanthropy. It's pretty damn brilliant. The fact that this issue ends with a total of 3 gut punches in a row, one right after the other, is the cherry on top. Because what this sets out, and what this makes clear, is that the series has a plan, not only for its story, but for the emotional arcs and how they tie deeply to the core of the Hulk. And if Ewing can pull it off, then it'll be something special. I really think it will this time, and I can't wait for that. Apparently we're only in the midway point of his planned run, so this is the perfect cap off and setup. It's just truly astounding. So overall, 2 thumbs up. And finally, we have Second Coming number 4. I'm just going to get this out of the way. I skipped every single page with superheroes on it, and I don't feel like I missed a thing. I read the first page that contained the Sunstar plot, but it was just more boring, inane superhero gags. And every page I skimmed past with them in it just felt the same. So why even bother? I did read all of the other pages. Every page was Jesus, and it was pretty damn good. I still maintain that everything to do with Jesus are the things that Russell has been placing most of his interest and focus in. It's still the same kind of stuff that might ruffle the feathers of a few traditional Catholics, but at the very least, it's trying to ask bigger questions. It's trying to have a discussion. It's trying to reach out to the reader and have an earnest dialogue and connection. It's pretty much the pinnacle of what I was hoping this series would be like. Something earnest and something a bit thoughtful. It's just a shame that I had to read only half an issue to get it. It might not be saying all the things that I personally feel, but it's authentic. And when a writer is being authentic, that's all you can really ask for when they're writing Jesus. They have to come from the heart. And I think that Russell really is pouring his heart out for these pages, and he's trying to really process things, and not in a kind of mocking, kind of facsimile, very hollow way like Tom King does. Russell is actually trying to say something, and he's trying to say something in a way that can speak to other people. So, it's really good, and it's something that makes me just want to sit down and reread it again, and it's amazing. It really is. Everything else just should have been just cut out, and it's honestly just really sad and disappointing that half the series has just been so uninteresting. If I was only rating the Jesus parts, it would be an automatic 2 thumbs up, but it's weighed down by the rest of the mindlessness. So overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. Oh, and I almost forgot about Marauders number 1. Mutants on a boat, great character dynamics, fun as hell, and amazing setup. I had a lot of fun with it, and I can't wait to see where this goes. So the second of the first wave of Dawn of X, 2 thumbs up. And now we can head on into what I watched this week. The first thing we have is the premiere of Watchmen. Episode 1, it's summer and we're running out of ice. This is the first episode of the new show, and the actual review of it is something that I think is going to be pretty short, because overall, it's just a mixed bag. There are some interesting and hard-hitting aspects to it, but in terms of substance and general style, it just feels kind of generic and maybe a bit shallow. The aesthetic comes across as pretty flat and uninteresting outside of a few splashes that it's inherited from either the comic or what it's cribbing from how the Snyder film translated the visual language, such as it was. Honestly, I found it a bit tedious at times. It's not really helped by how blunt a lot of the themes are set up, and that's not to say the comic was subtle at all, but there are some things that are a bit easier to digest and mull over because of how we engage and interact with the comic, over being more captive observers of a show and having to be locked in even when the show is being clunky. And it's pretty clunky. It's trying to be more nuanced and gradient in terms of tone and themes, but they're still very paint by numbers. That said, I think that a fair amount of what it did actually had merit and room to grow. Plus, when it's not feeling superficial, some of the ways it actually connects and expands on the story of the original series is actually pretty neat and clever. Simple, but still kind of clever. And it's nice to see that being tackled, which is why it's kind of ridiculous when people are even failing to grasp the littlest, most very dull things about it and just stumble over themselves in confusion. Like people who didn't understand why Rorschach became the figurehead for an ultra right-wing extremist movement, and like it's the show saying that Rorschach is evil and racist, when all it's really doing is expanding on the effect of Rorschach mailing his damn manifesto to an ultra-right extremist newspaper and following up on what would happen, or that the show is portraying cops and the main characters as saintly and pure, and that it's being hypocritical when they're doing grimier and darker stuff, despite the show taking some painfully blunt moves to paint parallels between the new system of masked cops and the comedian, and even making that same parallel between the extremists and the masked cops. It's not being subtle about this at all, but I guess people will miss what they don't want to see. And it's not a great show so far, but there are some charms to it. And I hope that as the weeks go by, that develops into something worthwhile. So overall, 2 thumbs middle. Oh wait, and I forgot. It is kind of neat that HBO is actually putting out back matter similar to how the comic did on their website in the form of some whistleblower from the FBI. So that's actually pretty fun, and it does help a lot. So if you haven't checked that out because it's pretty interactive, and I love shit like that. So kudos to them. Next up, we have Titans Season 2, Episode 8, Jericho. It's another full flashback episode, and it was good, but I'm definitely starting to get bored of this season. But a special kind of bored where you're not ready to call it bad because everything it's doing is just functionally good, like it's going through the motions, but nothing has any energy or life to it. It's just doing all the stuff that it feels like it has to, and that's a shame. This episode doesn't feel like it has any other purpose but to fill up time and explain backstory that is already self-evident. It's good to know more about Jericho and see him in his element for a little bit, but it's kind of like Aqualad in the previous flashback episode, except without any of the grounding or dynamic that Garth had with Donna. I mean, you could say that it's meant to showcase more of his dynamics with Dick and Deathstroke, but those barely land, and it kind of removes a lot of his own agency and any interest he has. There's not even much to describe here because the Titans are pretty much the versions we've been seeing for the past 2 seasons, so there's not even that to be engaged by, like the Aqualad episode. It's just adequate. I kind of hope this will pay off with Jericho being revealed to have been pulling the strings all along, but I'm kind of starting to doubt that. Even if that was the case, this series seriously needs a kick in the pads. Something to get stirring. And I hope it happens soon. I really do. This was a watchable episode, but I can't say I was motivated or engaged or excited or really had any emotion toward it at all. 2 thumbs middle. And now we head on into our special Halloween Blowout review. It's the final review of Unsourced Wall's 2nd annual Halloween Blowout month. So thank you so much to everyone who voted. And the winner of the last poll was Ghost Rider. Now, Ghost Rider is a movie that tries really hard. And if you're going to take anything away from it, then it's going to be a sense of quasi-admiration that it really tried to reach for the things that it did. But does that make it a good or fun movie? Kinda. This is a movie that feels divided against itself. It feels both grasping at being hip and cool, while also just reveling in being goofy, campy, and wacky. It's a movie that somehow feels like it's rushing too fast, but also that it's ungodly slow. Either or would have been more consistent, but this is a movie that cares very little about consistency, sense, or tact outside of the immediate moment. The best way to describe it is that you could watch the first 50 minutes of this movie and swear that it's only been 20 minutes, and that you can watch the last 50 minutes of it and be completely confident that it was actually twice that length. And it's a shame, because the amount of content that the first half of this movie packs into itself keeps it afloat, because it's nothing but the bare bones plot, every scene having no connecting threads other than the story itself, and then desperately trying to depict itself in the coolest way possible. And it's an effective strategy, like it takes no prisoners, which is why it's just ridiculously corny, but it's something that keeps you watching because of the audacity of it. Like, we get cuts from regular scenes to empty deserts with raining fire that morph into a demon that morphs into a different demon, and that's just a transition. Or we have scenes where Peter Fonda as Mephisto is eating the scenery and tipping his hat to an evil haunted house devil attraction that laid the foundations for Nick Cage absolutely destroying any sense of character engagement or grounding with his pantomime style physicality and awkward, shy, dumbfounded way he portrays Johnny Blaze. It's really hard to put into words how every single scene has like a gag a minute. If it was just a tiny bit more blunt with those punchlines, it would say "From the Files of Police Squad" on the cover. It just doesn't let up, which makes it weird and honestly distracting whenever it tries to be more emotional, more heavy, or even when it tries to get you to take the plot a little bit more seriously. Because by the time it tries to do any of these things, or even explaining the ins and outs of the background and lore, it doesn't really need to, because at that point you just stop expecting anything to make sense or to hold together. A 1.5-minute long scene of Nick Cage screaming while his skin burns off that is punctuated by random clips of fireballs every 5 seconds? Sure. Whistling for his bike and having it race over like a dog? Okay. Touching his bike and having it transform from a cool looking bike into some sort of chain and skeleton bike? Well, alright. The movie should have just ended 20 minutes after the first fight where all that happens, because after that, everything else just feels pointless. It already pierced the veil of having any kind of structure or emotional weight and has become a comedy about a skeleton-headed man who gets into pratfalls and slapsticky brawls with elemental demons. But somehow, we have to include this homicide police plot, Eva Mendes doing some Lois Lane style style stuff and the idea that a serial killer could be turning people into ass statues, it's worthless. You could have just cut it out of the movie, because all any of this stuff really contributes is an origin for Ghost Rider's jacket, which he already had, and a masterpiece of a scene where he goes pretty much nya at some cops and gives them the finger while riding on water. And then he kills another demon with science right after that. It's a masterpiece, isn't it? But seriously, cut out all the exposition and subplot scenes from the second half and you have something. You really do. But since the movie does want to make a big deal about the story, let me get into it for a bit, because it makes no fucking sense. Alright, so the very concept of the Ghost Rider as the movie puts it out is insanity. Mephisto can go out, tempt people, get people to sign his contracts, but still somebody else has to collect the soul because a soul is just left behind instead of immediately going to hell. Like, why? Why is a soul staying behind when they already sold their soul to the devil? It just makes no sense. It just adds a really unnecessary middleman. And the MacGuffin in this movie just makes it jankier, because both Mephisto and his son are after this contract that houses the souls of 1,000 people, which will make either of them uber powerful. But again, I have to ask, how? Mephisto, the devil, has been at this for thousands of years. He's probably already gotten thousands upon thousands of souls. How is a singular minuscule lump sum going to make such a difference? They never explain it. It just is an instant win button. Oh, and before I forget, the backstory even makes it clear that Ghost Riders are useless, because apparently it's been 125 years since the last rider before Johnny, and even after Johnny sold his soul, Mephisto still waits like another 30 years just to pull the trigger on it. It's just a lot. But if anything other than the scenes that try so hard to focus on the plot, or any of the other forced subplots make this movie unappealing, it's that the guy who plays Mephisto's son, Blackheart, can act. Or if he can, he's been directed poorly, because he can't act like a villain. He's beyond wooden 80% of the time. I bet he thinks, or the director thinks, that they're going for this grand and Shakespearean style diction and performance, but it just comes off as hollow and stilted. It's supremely awful, but you ain't watching it for him. You're watching this movie for Nick Cage's insane acting, Peter Fonda reveling as the devil, ridiculous fight scenes, and maybe even Cowboy Ghost Rider. And for that token, it's still pretty worth it, if you can stomach the rest. Overall, I'll give it 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle, and a number score of 7 out of 10, which is really speaking to how much fun those ridiculous, insane, mind-boggling moments are, because the rest of it is just so painful, but there's just so much charm about it, and I had to say, it made me really want to watch the second one, and I never have, so maybe I'll check that out next year. But anyway, thank you for this year's Halloween Blowout. I'm super grateful that we had another successful one, and for all of you who voted for this one to be the ride out, because it was an amazing way to close this year. And I can't wait for next time. So thank you so much for Halloween Blowout. And if you haven't seen Ghost Rider in a while, check it out, because it holds up in the worst of ways. And that's what makes it insanely rewatchable. So you know what? I had a great time. Anyway, finally, we reach listener questions. We have one question this week from the amazing Medea, and their question is, favorite Halloween-centric comic? There's not a lot of big, high-profile Halloween-centered comics. I mean, outside the tie-in minis and one-shots to the movie franchise. But other than that, you have the Sabrina horror comic or the Archie horror comics, which are always kind of set around Halloween, but I don't really rank them because I think they're kind of boring. The only thing that comes to mind immediately, and it's kind of a stretch, is this one issue of Supreme, where Moore does a pitch-perfect parody of Tales from the Crypt and Volta Horror and all the other EC horror comics. It's honestly kind of unsettling in how it very much rides the line between being humorous and having a lot of references that will make you kind of smirk, but also being really cutting and oddly uneasy with the characters of Supreme and how they're being targeted by these very malicious ghouls who are telling them awful things, and it's just depressing in a way. And that's what makes it so effective, and I think that's what makes it kind of really unsettling. It sticks with you. It sticks with you even if you don't know anything about the EC horror comics or their mascots. But honestly, it's both fun, it's thrilling, and it's just a nice genre throwback. Even if you can't go back and read the original EC comics, this is an issue you can pick up and get a pure, concentrated shot of what they were all about. Similarly to how Creepshow did it. And that's a really high bar. So that's one of my favorite Halloween comics. I'm going to actually go back right now and read it So thank you for motivating me to do that, Medea, and thank you for that amazing question, because seriously, it was just so fun to think about it and to find what really spoke to me as Halloween comics. Not just a horror comic, but something that I think captures the spirit of the season. So thank you again. I really appreciate your question. And I just want to say that I appreciate all those out there who are sending a question, topic, or comment to the show. It means so much to me, and it's so amazing. So thank you all so much. And I just want to say that if anyone out there has their own questions, topics, or comments they want to hear discussed on the show, you can find me on Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN. I want to give a shout out to the cover artists for the show at DOTEMCEE. Please check them out. They're amazing. And I just want to give a small little plug is that both of us are contributing to this Ultraman fanzine that is releasing on the 31st. I'll put a link to the main website it's going to be hosted on in the description. All the proceeds are going to charity. It's only $10 if you like very comfy science fiction art and fics that are an array of really talented artists and talented writers. Please check it out because it's for a good cause and I think you'll really enjoy it. I really do. So thank you again for listening. I hope you have a great holiday season. I hope you have a great Halloween and see you again next time.